Hi, my name is Noah Bentley. I'm a professional steam locomotive engineer at a theme park, and I'm a hobby blacksmith welder, and this is my shop. Alrighty, just built this about 2 weeks ago. This is my gas forge. I wanted something that could do long heats for doing scrolls and texturing and stuff like that, long tapers. My disc sander does all right. I'd like to get a belt sander someday, but this is what I got for right now. This is my scrap metal Appalachian power hammer. I used to be a professional blacksmith, and everything I'd ever used was air hammers. And occasionally I've used Little Giants, and I never liked how a Little Giant operates. They're really hard to control. They seem to hit too fast, and they don't usually, even the big ones don't seem to hit very hard. So when I decided to build my own power hammer, I knew I couldn't build an air hammer, but I could build a mechanical hammer and try to make it behave as much like an air hammer as possible. And this power hammer, as far as I'm concerned, behaves like an air hammer as close as it can be and still be mechanical. This hammer's a lot different than most scrap metal homemade hammers. For one thing, I use Little Giant dies. These are out of a 25-pound Little Giant, and they are installed with wedges in dovetails, just like a Little Giant. And I did that on purpose, that way I can, if I ever want to buy different dies for it, I can just buy Little Giant dies. I don't have to try to make dies. A lot of people will bolt their dies down, and a lot of times it breaks the bolts off. This system has worked very well. The top die does occasionally come loose. If I work it really, really hard, I have to tighten the wedge. Also, the dies on this are not set at a 45. I did that so that way I can pull the top die out and take the ram out of the bearing. This thing was kind of built, I got excited, and I built it with all just pipe steel bearings, and with the hope that once I got the geometry figured out, I would change everything to pillar blocks. That was 3 years ago, and it's had zero problems. As long as I oil it before I use it, it seems to be just fine. So for the time being, it's steel on steel bearings. And this is just a piece of square tubing with another piece of square tubing in it. When I weighed the ram, it weighs 65 pounds, and as you can see, it hits very hard. And it's slow enough that it behaves a lot like an air hammer, and so it's easy to manipulate stock. I can actually put top tools under there and safely use them, where a lot of mechanical hammers you can't do that for fear of losing your hands. And it's set up, other than that, set up like a basic Appalachian power hammer. If you look down here, I've got the spare tire. It's got a 1-horse electric motor and counterweight on the tire. This is actually a train wheel from work that I welded on here to give it more mass. The whole frame is filled with gravel, so this thing weighs a little over a ton, which is good. It's why I wanted it to be nice and solid. If we go over here, this is my welding table. It's 3 foot by 8 foot, and a little on the small side, but I can do most of my projects. This is my coal forge right here. When I left my blacksmith job in the middle of the economy crash in 2009, I had gone to a welding supply place and was talking to the guy there, and he wanted to start a blacksmithing program, and so he hired me on the spot. And the first thing I was to do is to set up, build a forge and various blacksmith tools, jigs and stuff. And about an hour after he hired me, he came out and said that he was going to have to fire me because he didn't have enough money. And so I pleaded with him so I could at least show that I was a decent fabricator. And I told him, I said, I will build a forge in 3 hours out of whatever you've got. And he said, okay, we can try that. And so I built this forge in 3 hours, and you could tell, but it is a working forge, and I've had it for over a decade now. He saw the forge, was very impressed with my ability to throw things together very quickly, and said, doesn't matter how fast you are, if I hire you, I've got to fire one of my employees. So he sent me packing. 2 weeks later, he called me and told me to come get the forge, that he felt bad about firing me. So that's how I ended up with this forge. This is a 1900 Champion blower. It's got some wear in it, but it still works good. I've had it for almost 20 years now. Someday I'm going to put an electric blower on this thing, but right now it's still hand cranked. I'll come over to this side. This is kind of my welding area. I've got a Grizzly TIG welder. Got a cutting torch, bandsaw, got a Lincoln MIG welder. I use the MIG welder for almost everything. The TIG is a little underwhelming, but you get what you pay for. Here's my steel rack. This is a project that I'm working another video on. This is a pizza oven. This is the steel stand, and then I'm going to build a brick pizza oven on top of it. This is my column mill. It does all right. It's not, I mean, it's a column mill, so it's not the most rigid thing, but it does have a 3-horse motor on it, so it has got power aplenty. This is my little Atlas lathe. It's a 12-inch. It's got a upgraded bigger chuck on it. This chuck actually is interesting. I had a back plate that came with the lathe that fit the threads, and when you machine a back plate to fit your chuck, it's supposed to make it where it's pretty much an exact fit, or ever so slightly a press fit, so it holds center. I lost track of my measurements and made it 10 thousandths undersized, so it's loose on the back of the chuck. And so it had big torch cut slots in it for the chuck it had before. And so I put the bolts in there, I messed with it, dialed it in, never could get it any closer than about within 3 thousandths while holding a piece of stock on it, or in it. I knew that it was going to come loose, so I actually welded the bolts to the plate on the back side, and after welding the bolts to the plate and it cooled, it brought this chuck in within 1/1000th of an inch, so I thought that was pretty cool. It's a little underpowered for what I do, but it came with a nice tool cabinet and lots of tooling, and so that's what I went with. Over here is my other workbench. I've got steam whistles and different stuff up on my shelf. And I've got fasteners, I've got nuts and screws and bolts and everything. I got pipe fittings and springs and air cylinders and caulk and weed eater wire and everything over here. Just kind of my storage area. Over here is a video of me making this crane. This is my overhead jib crane. It's made almost entirely, with the exception of this I-beam, out of scrap metal. It moves very easily. I mean, you move it like this, basically one finger. I'm very happy with it, and it really helps with saving my back when it comes to picking heavy things up. This is my wood furnace. It's not fully installed yet. It's going to get ductwork before this winter, so I can actually, the shop isn't insulated, and so if I can pipe the hot air to all the corners, it should stay pretty comfortable in here. I had that little cast iron stove last winter, and it did almost nothing, so this is quite a bit bigger. Over here we've got train parts. I have pieces to a 1-foot gauge 440. It's homemade. I've got the cylinder castings and drivers, and someday I'm going to work on it. I haven't done it yet, but I've got most of the pieces to build it. I've got to make a lot of parts for it. And over here I've just got wire storage and various tools and aerosols. I've got my wrenches across that wall. toolbox right here. This was a big Sony surround sound system, and the day after I put it in the shop, we had like hurricane rain and winds here. It was like 80-mile-an-hour winds and rain. There was rain blowing through the cracks in the wall. I mean, it was like a sprinkler was going off in here. It was crazy, and it soaked the stereo and ruined it. So now I have a boombox that I listen to. But that's my shop.
I am a roving gambler. I gamble down in town. Wherever I meet with a deck of cards, I'll lie.